Excellent. Now that I've looked over your objective description, I looked over your stuck points, and I noticed that they were popping up during your objective description, which is normal. It's completely it's something that I anticipated. It is something that tends to be frequent with most people, where most people tend to blame themselves. They tend to ascribe a level of guilt undue for themselves. So, your stuck points were, if I hadn't drank that much, it wouldn't have happened. If I hadn't trusted, it wouldn't have happened. If I hadn't stayed out that late, it wouldn't have happened. And if I had my significant other present, it wouldn't have happened. These are understandable stuck points, and these are stuck points that, before we move on, are falling underneath the category of reverse negative responsibility. What reverse negative responsibility is, or negative reverse responsibility, is that these are responsibilities that we lay upon ourselves in retrospect. So if something happens, in retrospect, we blame all of the events that led up to it. And even if it wasn't our own action, even if we had nothing to do with it, it is our belief that the events or the actions we took that led up to that point of someone doing something against us, or someone else taking another action against us, or an external factor taking action against us, is ultimately our own fault because we took actions prior to that to lead us to that point. For example, to clarify that point. Going back to the example of the child getting hit in the back of the head, if the child hadn't walked out of the school, if the child hadn't been standing there, if the child had instead walked home instead of taking the bus, and so would have gone another direction, they wouldn't have gotten hit in the back of the head. And that, once again, is reverse negative responsibility, where if the child hadn't taken all of these steps leading up to that point, they would not have gotten hit in the back of the head. The reason this is illogical, and the reason this isn't based in objective reality, is because, frankly, there is an infinite number of actions we could have taken that we didn't, or that we could have, and it would have maybe led to a worse situation. It might have led to a better situation, who knows. But there is an infinite level of actions that we could have taken, that ascribing a level of guilt and shame to actions that were normal at the time to have taken during that instance is ultimately something that we place upon ourselves as our own burden of guilt, and as proof that we should carry a level of responsibility over something that we didn't do. So, in the case of you drinking too much, this could be something that you probably think, well, if I hadn't drunk so much, I would have been able to protect myself. I would have been able to keep myself on guard. This is something that haunts a lot of people, where if they hadn't drunk, they wouldn't have acted out. Let me dispel one myth for you, though. When someone gets drunk, despite popular misconception, they do not act out their subconscious ones. They do not act out subconscious thoughts. In fact, it isn't something that they would normally, them being especially a high level of inebriation, is not going to be a deeper version of themselves. In fact, it is not themselves. It is another mind-altering substance that ultimately makes you act and behave in a very different fashion than what you would normally behave and act as. And as soon as you are no longer in it, you are absolutely horrified or surprised or just shocked at what happened, because that isn't a behavior that you would do. So that's dispelling myth number one. Why would I dispel that? Because people often believe that whatever actions they take underneath when they're inebriated is often a reflection of themselves, and that isn't true. It is not a reflection of yourself. It is not a sense of, well, you would have done it if you had lower inhibitions, or you would have done it if you had the opportunity to do it. It is not something you would normally do. For example, someone walking along does not usually end up eating grass, yet some people who are completely drunk will eat grass. Why? It's not because they're lowered inhibitions, it's because they are not acting in a rational or cognitive capacity. They are not themselves. And number two, the actions other people take when you are inebriated are not your actions. They are their actions. And frankly, when it comes to the level of protection and protecting yourself, there are always going to be occasions where we will not be able to protect ourselves. Whether it be in a car, whether it be in our house, there are always going to be instances where we cannot protect ourselves. So the idea of highlighting and emphasizing this one occasion where we could not protect ourselves because of alcohol and say, well, this is our fault, is ultimately putting undue emphasis on one aspect that, frankly, could have happened if you had been just soberly walking to school at 12 p.m. or soberly walking to the office at 8 a.m. It could happen at any instance if a malicious or manipulative or malintentioned person is nearby and sees the opportunity. It is not something that you can unfairly judge yourself over not being able to protect yourself in this one instance. Because if that person had been there and you were alone in any of these instances, they would have acted in the same way. So that is not something that you can sort of point out and say, well, this is the one thing that I could have done. Because frankly, there's always going to be that opportunity for that person. And the fact that they took it that one time is evident that that was their action, not your action. And this is to dispel, of course, that you should not be looking over your shoulder at all times. Because if then you do that, well, frankly, you won't be able to live life. And most of the time, most people are well-intentioned. Most people have good in their hearts. Most people will not overstep their boundaries. Most people will look for the good of people. How do I know this? Because if it wasn't true, this world would be utter madness. And frankly, it would be utter chaos. You wouldn't be able to just sit in class and, just be okay, because there would be a huge majority of people with bad intentions waiting to just pounce. But that isn't true. You go to class and there's a lot of people that are just sitting there probably having the same worries as you do, where they have to look over their shoulder over that one bad apple that is somewhere around. And frankly, that's not a way to live life. That is something that will ultimately end up weighing upon your mind to such a degree that you won't be able to just appreciate having the freedom that you do. Now, the second misconception that you had, the first was alcohol, and the second misconception you had was if your significant other was present, this wouldn't have happened. Your significant other, let's say your significant other was present. Let's say they stepped away for a little while. Would it still have happened because it was the other person's action? Yes. If they had been present, would the other person have done it? Maybe, maybe not, but you don't know for sure. The person might have done it anyways. If your significant other wasn't present with you in the grocery store and this person tried something in the grocery store, would it have been because the significant other wasn't there? Maybe, maybe not. That's always the question at hand, is that maybe, maybe not. And the fact that it's a maybe, maybe not shows that there isn't any responsibility on your shoulders, because frankly, it was the other person's actions that were placed on you, not the other way around. You did nothing to elicit their reaction. You did nothing to elicit their action. They were looking for an opportunity. They were, even if the opportunity didn't rise, they were willing to take an opportunity. They were willing to do anything at any means to get an opportunity. And this could have happened to anyone. And they would have acted upon them, and anyone would feel the way you feel. So, ultimately, this person is at fault completely. Now, when it comes to some of your other stuck points, these are things we will analyze further. And these are things that we'll cognitively process together. This is more so just a preliminary, a preface, if you will, to the rest of the therapy. I just wanted to make sure that we touch upon the topics quickly, so that we would give you a better understanding of how this process is going to go. And we will continue to keep writing because, frankly, writing does help soothe the mind to be able to see the thoughts physically and understand them outside of ourselves, where we're not just looming over them and looping them and looping them and having another thought come in and having another thought come in. You're only able to write so much. So being able to analyze a number of physical, tangible thoughts as opposed to having a flood of them will help you and aid you in being able to better understand what happened, why you're thinking the way you're thinking, how you get to these conclusions, and how we can put some objective measures in place for you to, when a stuck point arises, for you to undo that logic and return to the reality, return to the objective reality that is present. So I will continue to analyze this, and I will give you back the journal to write down any further thoughts you have.